Welcome back to the Movement for Life podcast. My name is Kolby. I'm the owner and operator here at Oxnard Movement, on the CrossFit gym here in Oxnard, California. Glad to have you. In today's episode, we're going to be a little bit different format than we normally are. If you're watching us on YouTube, you're going to notice environment's changed a little bit. I've got a whiteboard today. We're going to talk a little bit about some stuff on this whiteboard. So if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple or a podcast platform, today might be a great day to switch over to YouTube and watch some of this on YouTube. But it's also going to be amazing information to be able to listen and hear as well. Before we get going with our topic today, which is going to be, what are some of the metrics that I should be measuring for my health? And maybe what are the metrics that my doctor is going to measure, and what are the metrics that my gym is going to measure? And are those related or correlated with each other? And it's going to be a super fun topic. I've talked about this many times before inside the gym, but very rarely have I organized it in a format like this, a podcast that you can listen to and absorb and even ask questions to. So before we get going, I want to talk about what I did to move in this last week, because at the end of the day, that's what this podcast is all about, movement for life. In this past week, I got to surf 3 times. I've been working a lot of lifeguarding lately. Very luckily, we get to go on a workout on duty, stay in shape, stay after it. And I've gotten to surf a couple of times. I have also done some beach workouts. And this past Sunday, I decided to run a few miles on the beach. Ended up running 7 miles on the beach. A little bit harder than I anticipated, but I felt great. My calves were very sore the next day. I also got to do CrossFit 3 times in this past week, which was better than it usually has been. It's usually been about 2 times each week. So I was super happy about being able to get in and do CrossFit. I've said on the last couple of podcasts that when I'm only doing CrossFit a couple times a week, it is rough. CrossFit is very different than running on the beach or running and swimming, or, some squats and push-ups and sit-ups on the beach. Using some weights and doing some gymnastics skills is definitely very different cardio than cyclical movements like air squats, running, sit-ups, things like that. So it's been challenging and fun. What I haven't been doing, what I've been missing, is pickleball. I have not been playing pickleball. It's probably been close to 2 or 3 weeks since I played any pickleball. I definitely miss it. But as is life, there are seasons to things. So that is what I did last week. Let's hear what some of you guys did. Let's change this up a little bit and maybe give me some information on some things that you guys did. Tell me, inspire me. Tell me some things that you guys are doing. Maybe it's inside the gym, maybe it's outside of the gym, that helps you stay healthy, helps you stay moving throughout your life. Great. Today's topic: what metrics should I be measuring? I had this conversation a lot. A lot of this information doesn't come from me uniquely. Greg Glassman, the founder of CrossFit, actually is an extremely intelligent person, and he is really good at creating concise points of view, concise statements about health and wellness. And so a lot of this is from him. I've heard it from him and maybe adapted a little bit or changed a little bit or been as close as I can to him. And we're going to talk about the sickness, wellness, fitness curve, as you can see on this board here today, when it comes to metrics. And what do I mean by metrics? I mean things that you can measure in the gym, things that you can measure outside of the gym, and things that maybe your doctor can measure. Now, before I get into why measuring metrics, Greg has a really awesome conversation about the 5 buckets of death, like 5 different reasons that people die. It's an amazing little lecture. Maybe it's about 20 minutes. Maybe I post it down in the comments down below. He kind of explains, hey, what are some of the ways that people die? And here's kind of what he came up with. The icks is what he calls it. So you can either die of something that's chronic, you can die of something that's kinetic, you can die of something that is toxic, you can die of something that is genetic, and you could die of something that is microbic. Those are really the only 5 ways. I think he argues in his video that you might be able to argue for one other way of death as well. But he also goes on to state that the biggest one of these buckets by far is the chronic, is the death by chronic. And the hardest part about the chronic stuff is it might be the only one that is preventable, right? Kinetic, you can think of like accidents, collisions. Toxics is something like poisons, like ingestions or skins. Genetic is something that it was already predetermined to happen. And microbic is some sort of bacterial infection that causes something that escalates downhill, or sepsis as well. All the rest of those things are much more difficult to prevent, whereas the deaths that occur in the chronic bucket are largely preventable with lifestyle, with eating well and exercising regularly. And so he came up a long time ago with the correlation between, or the continuum between sickness, wellness, and fitness. What is someone who is sick look like? What does someone who is well look like? And what does someone who is fit look like? And defining some of those things so that you can have a little bit more clarity about what is meant with each of those. And so I want to talk about some of the things that maybe your doctor would measure when we're talking about this. And the first one is going to be blood pressure. We all know that when you go into the doctor's office, first thing that kind of happens is you walk into the office, they'll do like a height and weight on you, then you'll sit down in the room, and a nurse will come in and probably put a blood pressure cuff on you and a pulse oximeter. And that's one of the things that they want to get, is a resting blood pressure from you. Another one is a resting heart rate. Another one is potentially a percentage body fat. Depending on how in-depth you're getting with your doctor, they might be measuring body fat in some capacity, measuring blood glucose, how much sugar is in your bloodstream at any given time. They've got normal ranges that they have for that, bone density ranges, and then A1C levels. A1C levels are related to your blood glucose as well. So these are all a bunch of things that are related to your health. And we'll call it related to your wellness, because your doctor is looking at a bunch of these measurements, whether they're called vitals or whether they're called biometrics. The doctor has a list of a bunch of these, and they're kind of trying to figure out, are you within normal ranges? So the doctor can say, you're normal on this, you're normal on this, you're outside range on this, you're normal on this, you're normal on this, you're not normal on this. And when you're not normal, you could be not normal in 2 different ways. You could be not normal because you've gone to the sickness side, and those numbers are less than optimal, or you could go in the opposite direction, and you could be outside of those ranges in the optimal direction, and what we call the fitness side. All right, quick little caveat as well. There is Nothing that is necessarily saying that fitness causes these metrics to happen, but they're strongly correlated. So when you see one of them, you are likely to see the other. In science, it's really difficult to prove causation, but it's a lot more productive to understand correlations between things. So there is a difference between causation and correlation, but the metrics, baseline metrics with sickness, with wellness, and with fitness are good correlations between the health metrics that you also see. Now, what are some normal ranges for these things? Blood pressure. A normal person should have a blood pressure around 120 over 80. 120 over 80. A resting heart rate. You should be having I'm going to write this down. A resting heart rate is around 72 beats per minute. So 120 over 80. A resting heart rate of 72 beats per minute. A body fat percentage of 18 to 22%. That is an average of males and females. So males will be on the lower end of that average. Females will be on the higher end of that average. That's just the middle ground for them. Blood glucose, you're looking at something like 70 to 120 milliliters per deciliter. Bone density, I actually need to look at the metrics for the bone density. Maybe that's something I can add at the end of this video. The doctors very much so have a normal range for what bone density should look like. And then A1C levels. Normal levels for A1C is under 5.7%. Normal ranges. There's a standard deviation on each of these that the doctor could still say, hey, you're totally normal within these numbers. You're within one standard deviation of normal. I'm not really worried about it. I'm not really, it's not up for cause for concern. But these numbers, they can shift outside of those normal ranges. And we talked about before, they can shift either left towards sickness and they can shift right towards fitness. And we'll look at the sickness numbers first. When I'm typically seeing somebody who is sick, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute. These are some of the numbers that we are typically seeing for somebody who's sick. On a blood pressure range, I'm looking for something like maybe a 180 over 100, a resting heart rate of 100 beats per minute or more, a body fat percentage of 35% or more, a blood glucose of 200 milliliters per deciliter or more, low levels of bone density, and remember, I don't have a number for you for that bone density, and then A1C levels of positive or more than 6.4%, more than 6.4%. That's what numbers look like typically. And you don't have to have all of them. You could have a few of them. But there's some things associated with these metrics. And I'll kind of walk through some of them now. A blood pressure of 180 over 100 would be something that your doctor calls hypertension or high blood pressure. You might have all heard of that one. That's a super easy one. A resting heart rate of 100 beats per minute or more is something that your doctor would consider tachycardic or elevated resting heart rate. 35% body fat or more, that's something that your doctor would consider obesity or overweight. Then you have a resting blood glucose of 200 milliliters per deciliter or more. That would be diabetes, likely type 2 diabetes, insulin-resistant diabetes. Could be a type 1 as well. Low levels of bone density. As we age, we lose some of our bone density, but if we also do not engage in some sort of weight-bearing or strength training work, we also lose bone density as well. that would be called osteoporosis. If you're in the population of the 55 years or older, you've probably heard of that word. If you're in a population of 25 to 35, you've probably never heard of that word before. And then A1C levels. A1C is also correlated with diabetes or pre-diabetes. So numbers between 5.7 and 6.4% would be considered pre-diabetic, and numbers above 6.4 would be considered diabetic, where there's some sort of action that needs to be happening. Now, all of the conditions that I just talked about right there, that when we see these metrics, that's usually what's going on. Those are almost all sitting in this chronic bucket. And what does that mean when it's sitting in the chronic bucket? It means that almost all of them are preventable and reversible with lifestyle, with eating well and exercising regularly. I think we may have lost a little bit of that recording. I'm on my phone, so we might have lost a little bit of the video recording for just a minute, but my audio is still on fire. So those are sickness things, all preventable with lifestyle, eating well and exercising regularly. Now let's look at the other side of that fitness side. What do some of those metrics, those normal metrics, look like, typically correlated with somebody who's fit? They look like something like this, something like a blood pressure of 105 over 70, a resting heart rate of 55 beats per minute or even less, a body fat percentage of 12 to 16%. Remember, that's an average of male and female. Resting blood glucose of 60 to 100 milliliters per deciliter, increased levels of bone density, and an A1C level below 5.7%. You might be looking at something like a 5.4 or below. So when we look at the metrics on this side, they go in the opposite direction. And opposite doesn't mean always higher or lower, because sometimes a higher number is better or would be indicative of optimal, and sometimes a lower number would be indicative of better. A quick little example of like what's a number that would be higher instead of lower that would be indicative of optimal is HDL cholesterol, or high density lipo. That increases the more fit you are. The high density fats increase. So that would be optimal if you had more high density fats. Most of these numbers tend to move in the downward directions, but that's not always the case. So this is what somebody who is fit looks like. Now, this is all things that the doctor sees. The doctor doesn't see anything that's happening for you inside the gym or your lifestyle, right? They see snapshots of data. They're not seeing big pictures of your lifestyle. So doctors can kind of do two things with this data. They can, if we're starting to move in one direction, they can typically prescribe some sort of medication to try to improve medications, or they can have a conversation about lifestyle. Say, hey, we need to make some sort of improvement in lifestyle to get numbers back in that healthy range or even optimal range. They are not the ones to help you implement that, though. They're only the ones that tell you, hey, you should do something. Like, great, doc. I think I knew that, but I wasn't sure what to do. So that's what doctors are saying. I want to now share what I see inside the gym that I find that correlates. Remember, I don't want to say cause, but correlates with these metrics. They're the things that I get to see. And some of those things are going to be, I'll name two of them. I'm going to say your 1 mile run and your deadlift 1 rep max lift. Now, these are just 2 things. There could be a ton of different things, but there are what I would consider as a fitness professional or health and wellness professional normal ranges, just like your doctor says there's biometrics that are normal ranges. I think that there are normal ranges for sickness, for wellness, and for fitness for a list of different tests as far as physical activity go. A mile run, what I would consider a normal range for something like that, would be someone who could run a mile plus or minus a minute, in 10 minutes. You can run a mile in in 10 minutes. You're probably in that wellness category. That means you were jogging for most of it. You might have walked just a little bit, but you're almost jogging that entire time. That would be considered normal. Now, as far as deadlifting in relation to my body weight, it's hard to say an absolute. It's a lot easier when I say, hey, I can deadlift X percentage of my own body weight. That makes it a very applicable metric to use for each person. And I think somebody is in that normal range if they can lift their own body weight in a deadlift. That would be considered normal. If you weigh 150 pounds, you can do a 150-pound deadlift. Remember, that's not like I can rep out 150 pounds. That is a maximal effort. Now, with these 2 things, we can go two different directions, right? We can go left towards that sickness and right towards that fitness. And the numbers or the metrics change for each of these 2 things. And for a mile run, if I'm seeing a mile that's 15 minutes or more, I'm probably making the association that that person is in the sickness side of things. That means maybe you're walking for most of that mile and maybe even stopped a little bit as well. A deadlift. If someone struggles to pick up 1/2 or 50% of their body weight up off the ground, I'm probably also thinking that metric puts me somewhere in that sickness range. If I'm seeing some of those things, I'm likely seeing some of the biometrics that match that sickness side of the continuum. Now, if we look at the other side of this and we look at the mile run and the deadlift for somebody who's in the fitness side, a mile for somebody who's fit probably looks somewhere in that 6 to 7 minute range. And the deadlift weight for somebody who's in this fit side of the continuum is in the 2 to 3 times their body weight is what they can lift up off the ground. Now, if somebody's metrics look like this, I'm probably associating their biometrics with the metrics the doctor's also seeing and associating with optimal. Remember, these are not causations. Having a 6-minute mile does not cause my metrics to be like this, but they're correlated. Why is this important? Or why does this matter? Because more often than not, we can measure those lifestyle metrics on a more regular basis than we can measure those other biometrics. How often do you go to the gym versus how often do you go to the doctor? There's a huge gap in there. Now, don't get me wrong. If you have health issues, your doctor might say, hey, you need to buy a blood pressure cuff and you need to be measuring it once a day. Or your doctor, if you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, your doctor might say, hey, you need to get a glucometer and you need to test your blood glucose a few times throughout the day. That would mean, yes, you're going to be measuring these metrics on a more regular basis, but more often than not, you're going to be measuring your fitness metrics way more often than you're going to measure those biometrics or health metrics as far as your doctor is concerned. So I like to focus, especially because we're here in the gym, on those metrics that I get to see. It is I don't have enough hands and feet or teeth in my mouth to count the number of people who come to me with biometrics in that sickness or in that wellness range just post a doctor's appointment where they said, you need to change some things in your lifestyle because we have some metrics that are not going to go well for you. 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, 18 months down the road, they come back to me and say, Kolby, you will not believe it. My metrics, health metrics from the last time to this time are completely different. The doctor said, what are you doing? You need to keep doing that. So I've just been doing CrossFit and eating better. Amazing. I do believe that. It's amazing for every single one of you guys who gets to see that result, but I've seen it dozens and dozens and dozens of times with hard evidence. I know it works. I know this stuff correlates really, really well. I get to see it all the time. That doesn't take away from any of the accomplishment. And the cool thing about like lifestyle is it's not easy. It's not the easy way out. It's not the simple pill. It's not the drug. It takes time, effort, and energy. And no one else can do it for you besides yourself. So when you do see those metrics, that should be extremely motivating. It should be extremely, you should have a little bit of ego with that. You should be proud of your ability to be consistent, to show up, to eat well, and change those metrics. Because those metrics, they can temporarily change with medicines. They're not long-term solutions. Doing what you do here in the gym and changing these metrics as well, increasing physical capacities, changes those long-term as well. Now, here's the last thing that I'll kind of talk about with this conversation is the entire goal of doing anything as far as health and wellness is concerned in my head, there might be others that disagree, is to take somebody from wherever they are on this line, and we all sit somewhere on this continuum, and put you as far over on this fitness side as you possibly can. You could probably argue with me, but I think the best way to do that is twofold. Constantly varied functional movement performed at high intensities, CrossFit. I think it's the most effective way to get and stay fit. But then I want you to stay over there, right? I don't want you to just get there. I want you to stay there. And the other way that we do that is with community. You need to surround yourself with other people who think it's important to eat well and exercise regularly. If you don't do that, staying over here long term is extremely difficult. You might have heard you are the average of your 5 closest friends. Maybe you haven't heard that, but basically, whoever you associate yourself with, you will likely be like that as well. Obviously, there's outliers, but let's not talk about outliers. Let's talk about the meat and potatoes. So you want to surround yourself with people who are eating well and exercising regularly so that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, guess what you're still doing? Exercising regularly and eating well. That's the other half of this space, and arguably it's the more important half of Oxnard movement, or potentially any CrossFit gym in general. Is not only is it the fitness benefits, but it's the community that is also involved. It is extremely difficult to maintain lifestyle without support from the community. And here's why, because inevitable, life happens. Life doesn't care if it's the right time, if you are in the perfect circumstances. Whenever you feel like, especially for myself, whenever I feel like, hey, I'm on the right track. I got lots of things going for me. Life tends to just throw me things, whether it's a curveball or a slider. Baseball analogies maybe aren't the best here, but life gives you more than what you potentially could handle. And when that happens, we all just slide, because this is a continuum. And we slide back towards wellness, and we slide towards sickness. The entire purpose of all of this is to create a big enough hedge against that sickness so that when I potentially lose some of my fitness and my metrics shift a little bit because there was a death in my family, or because I lost a job, or because I had a change in marital status, or relationship stuff got hard, or I had kids. Sometimes health and fitness might not be your top priority. That's okay. We need to be able to weather those storms. And it's a lot easier to weather those storms when you have people around you that also support you in that as well. The community, the surrounding yourself with people who think it's important to eat well and exercise regularly. When those things happen, you need that support system so that you can get back towards this fitness, or at least shift back towards that way when the time is right. Awesome. This has been a super fun conversation. Remember, we kind of talked about the 5 buckets of death. We've got ways to die: chronic, kinetic, toxic, genetic, and microbic. We talked about some baseline biometrics. These are all biometrics that are kind of helping us determine that chronic bucket. Then we talked about some stuff that I see inside the gym from you that I think are strongly correlated with your health metrics as well. Things like your 1 mile run, things like your deadlift. There are a ton of other things that we actually measure inside the gym that correlate with those as well. Happy Thursday, guys. Remember, every single Thursday we put out a new podcast with ways to keep you moving throughout your life, helpful information, dedicated information. Maybe sometimes it's fun information. Please rate us. If you haven't watched this on YouTube, go over to YouTube, watch this video. We're on a whiteboard here. Subscribe, and let me know in the comments, or shoot me an email, Kolby@oxstarmovement.com. What are some ways that you stay moving throughout your life? See you later.